All righty. Good morning, everyone. Like Julianne said, my name is Ben Kessler. I'm the coordinator for Palmetto Clean Fuels and also a clean transportation specialist within the energy office. Welcome to today's Autogas Answers event, done in coordination with the Propane Education Research Council and the South Carolina Association of Pupil Transportation. So I'm just going to jump into some background of the energy office and some initiatives that we do and some resources that we have, and then I'll pass it off. Okay, here we are. Okay, so as some of you all know, we are in the Office of Regulatory Staff. That is our parent agency. If you don't know what the regulatory staff does, they're usually found in front of the Public Service Commission working on rate cases, pipeline safety monitoring, Uber and Lyft certifications, and programs like that. We stem out of the regulatory office. We are not regulatory, so we are the energy office, and I'll get into some things that we focus on there in a second. But we are funded wholly through the U.S. Department of Energy, through the State Energy Program, and then from there, the Palmetto Clean Fuels is an initiative of the Energy Office and is funded through the Clean Cities Program of the U.S. Department of Energy. So as the Energy Office, what do? We have three main items. We promote energy efficiency, renewable energy, and clean transportation. We do this through a variety of different means and methods, but we do provide a lot of technical assistance to folks. So on the energy efficiency side, we'll do building walkthroughs and energy audits for entities. We've got a couple different finance mechanisms if you're interested in doing clean transportation or energy efficiency upgrades. We do energy and education and outreach like we're doing here today. And we're known as the primary energy planning principal in the state. So we maintain a pretty large energy data clearinghouse. So if you ever need any energy data, we're a good resource to turn to. We also implement the state energy plan, of which one of those recommendations is lead by example, which I'll get into here in a second. So what is Palmetto Clean Fuels? Palmetto Clean Fuels is a U.S. Department of Energy designated clean cities coalition that works to reduce petroleum usage in the United States. And we do this through alternative fuels such as propane, like we were talking about today. But we are fuel agnostic. As you saw on the first slide, there are a bunch of different fuels that we work. And you might think maybe we're the only ones doing this, but we are not. There's almost 100 coalitions around the United States. So, you know, wherever you may be, wherever you move to, or wherever you end up, you'll probably be in a clean cities jurisdiction that can help you find, you know, local examples and partnerships with alternative fuels. So we're a really good resource. And how do we, And how do we reduce petroleum and increase air quality? We do it through a couple different strategies, but mainly working with light, medium, and heavy duty vehicles, such as buses and the support vehicles, to do analysis on them to see what are cost effective and you know, cleaner fuels for people to use, such as propane in school buses. We also work on idle reduction measures at schools with DHEC. So the Breathe Better programs, where students go out and count how many idling vehicles are in parking lots when student pickups happening, and raising air quality flags. That's something else that we work on. And then alternative and renewable fuel infrastructure deployment and planning. That is something else that we work on. So we'll get into alternative fuel corridors here in a second, but just some of the strategies. So like I said, lead by example is one of the items that came out of the 2016 State Energy Plan. And this is for state fleets to really lead the charge in adopting alternative fuel vehicles. So our example here in the Energy Office is a Chevrolet Bolt EV that we purchased in March of 2020. We have it promotionally wrapped here with our Plug-in SC campaign. And we're kind of using it as the case study for further adoption of electric vehicles within state fleet. So we're going to be putting out some procurement guidance and whatnot. So if you're interested, you can find out how you do it yourselves. And we're also, you see this charging station here that I'll talk about a little bit more, but that was put in the ground in partnership with the South Carolina Parks of Recreation and Tourism. So we work with other state agencies such as the South Carolina Department of Education, which we'll get into here today. But another great example of leading by example, they started propane acquisitions here in 2017. further grew their fleet with the VW settlement in 2019 by 78 buses. I believe there's about 217 currently in operation around the state. And Mike Bullman's on the call, and we'll get a little bit more into the detail about those numbers toward the end. But I did want to bring up this really wonderful event that happened in Greenville last week that was sponsored by PERC. This gentleman, this student here in the upstate, saw that his other classmates were riding propane buses, and he was riding a handicap diesel bus. So he petitioned his school and the Department of Education to receive a handicap propane bus, which is actually now the first in South Carolina handicap propane bus. So really great story if you haven't looked into it yet. So these alternative fuel corridors that I talked about, we work with the United States Department of Transportation, the Federal Highway Administration to designate corridors, parts of the interstate that can lead to travel using alternative fuel. So here you see a sign that's outside of I-26 that says, EV travel and propane stations begin so you can travel this corridor without any problems. This stemmed out of the Fixing America Surface Transportation Act that Congress passed in 2016. So we work closely with SCDOT on updating these signs as needed. And then, like I said, this plug-in SC, just a highlight of some examples that we have with state agencies. We placed 3 stations around the state, one at Santee, one at Paris, and one at Sesquicentennial State Park. So if you're ever over there, check them out. They're pretty neat. And then I know that Steve will talk a little bit about these, but some really good information and resources that you can find is the Alternative Fuels Data Center. This is run by the US DOE. There's a bunch of case studies, publications, data. There's the station locator map that you can find where alternative fuel stations are. So really great resources on there. There's the fueleconomy.gov website. This is very similar as to what you would find on the sticker. When you're purchasing a vehicle, you can compare vehicles across classes, fuel economies, costs, and whatnot. So really good resource. And then, of course, PalmettoCleanFuels.org is our website. And we've got some really good local resources there. And so my name is Ben Kessler. Like I said, I'm the coordinator for Palmetto Clean Fuels and the Clean Transportation Specialist within the Energy Office. My contact information is here. Please reach out to me if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. And I believe I'm going to pass it off to Steve Whaley with the Propane Education Resource Council. And thank you very much for the opportunity to present here today.
Ben, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And we're going to go ahead and get started with a little bit of a review of what propane is and what it's not. But before we do that, I wanted to kind of take the plane up to about a 30,000 foot level and just get our minds kind of wrapped around why are we doing anything different? The diesel that's been in buses for a long time. What motivates us to actually make a change, and what makes that change successful? In other words, what's the criteria for a successful alternative energy adoption? In other words, when we were doing horse and buggies back in the day, what made the gasoline automotive vehicle and the locomotives, what made them successful in moving forward and what our society looks for today? So what I'd like to do is just define that, not for propane or for biodiesel or for natural gas or electric, but just for everybody. Look at these 4 criteria, and these things have to happen before we're going to have any lasting, sustainable change. So the first one there, if it's not cleaner than what we're doing now, we need to go home and figure it out. Okay, but thankfully today we have quite a few options on the table that reduce those emissions and reduce them substantially. Okay, but there's another 3 items. The second one is the total cost of ownership has to be less. It has to be cheaper than what we were doing before. Okay, and that total cost of ownership, that return on investment, that cost per mile has to be better than what we've been doing with diesel, or we're not going to have anything that's going to sustainably last. And nobody's going to give up on performance. That there's no compromising on how well this thing can drive with acceleration or with range. It has to be able to do at least as good, if not better, than what we're trying to replace. And then the last one has to go without saying. We have to have a lot of this energy source available to make a sweeping change throughout our transportation change. So let's take a look at those 4 criteria in light of what we're talking about today in propane. So, well, the first one is it is the most cost-effective energy source in reducing those emissions. We're going to actually show you exactly how much that is in a moment. It's the lowest cost of total ownership of any fuel, alternative or conventional, and it provides a comparable or even improved performance without compromising on the range as well. And we have a lot of it. If you didn't know, the United States has more propane than all the other countries in the world combined. We used last year about 9 billion gallons of it here domestically, but we exported 19 billion gallons of propane last year to countries all over the world. So my job basically is to kind of reduce that 19 down and increase that domestic use up a little bit more. So we're going to get a lot more buses in South Carolina to help make that happen. So what is this fuel? What is propane, and why do we call it autogas? Well, it kind of started in Europe with that autogas term there, because every petrol station or gasoline station, what we would call here, has an autogas dispenser, because there's 26 million vehicles worldwide that are using this fuel, and it's the most common energy source after gasoline and diesel. But here in the United States, we call it propane, and whenever we use it in a motor fuel arena, we refer to it as autogas. So I'll use those terms interchangeably as we're talking about this. But it's the exact same fuel that you use out on the back deck when you're cooking on your grill. It's so clean, we let it actually touch our food. It is a byproduct of natural gas processing. So wherever we're mining for natural gas, we get a lot of natural gases: butane, ethane, pentane, methane, and propane. And we segregate all of these things in their best uses. And a lot of that uses is in millions of homes throughout the United States, as well as a lot of agricultural use. Forklifts, we've been doing propane in forklifts for decades, long before we were measuring any emission and regulating those emissions, because it was common sense. Whenever you were operating a forklift inside a warehouse with gasoline and diesel, people would be dying from carbon monoxide poisoning, and we started using propane because people didn't die. And now the whole world is our warehouse, and we're making it cleaner for everybody. There's also been a huge push in off-road equipment, especially in commercial mowers, for the use of propane as well. So where does it come from? We have 2 sources. We have an organic source, like I was saying earlier about how we're mining for natural gases, and we have a lot of it here. I refer to that as an organic source. But we also have a renewable source, and Ben's office is very much in tune with moving in the renewable energy source arena. So we're going to spend some time at the end of this talking a little bit more about renewable propane as well. The important thing here is to note that both are exactly the same molecular structure, and they have the same characteristics. In other words, it's non-toxic. You can't spill it, so you can't contaminate any air or soil or water sources. And it's much less expensive, as we'll see when we talk about infrastructure, to set up, even less expensive than gasoline and diesel, because you don't have that risk of contamination in the area that you're putting it in. So why are fleets choosing propane autogas? Well, this is what we're going to cover today. We've got a great set of panel and speakers to refer to these things, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about the emissions side of this, and let the others talk more about the others. So everybody has to have a path to zero emissions. And what has been the path for propane autogas? And we have three areas that we're working on. The first one in particulate matter. And propane engines have been extremely clean with not producing particulate matter. So, I mean, so clean, we don't even need to have a particulate matter filter on the propane engines. The next one is the nitrogen oxides, and this is the most harmful emission for contributing to respiratory illnesses. And with what's been happening with propane is a huge amount of nitrogen oxide reductions. Everybody has to conform to the EPA or CARB certifications for all of these emissions. But propane's gone a lot further with this. When the University of West Virginia, the same folks that busted the Volkswagen folks for cheating on this NOx emission, they did a study with mobile emission equipment on the best-in-class clean diesel compared to the best-in-class propane. And they drove these buses for several months on the same route, moving the same kids in every respect. And they found that the propane bus, even though both of them met the same, regulatory standards, the propane bus was 96% cleaner than the best-in-class clean diesel. This is a huge reduction in emissions. And the last one is greenhouse gases. Not only the greenhouse gases from the tailpipe, but the life cycle analysis of the whole process of greenhouse gas emissions from the energy source and where it has to go. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, especially in light of what renewable propane is. So how does it compare on the fuel cost reductions? For decades now, propane has always been less than gasoline or diesel. But around the country, here's a snapshot of last week. Now, these prices are retail prices for Autogas when they're dispensed into commercial fleets that have to pay road taxes, state and federal road taxes. Obviously, in the school bus arena, you're not going to be paying those, so it'll be less than these. But it just gives you an idea of around the country why we're getting so popular with propane. So. We're in not just buses, but a lot of different vehicles. Most of what we're talking about today is school buses. And we're going to have both Thomas representatives and Bluebird representatives talking about maintenance and other things with their buses that are both in South Carolina. But all three of the major OEMs for school buses have propane options as well as EV options. If they're not on the market today, they will be very, very soon with all three of them. But for propane, we have 20,000. It was earlier this year that we crested the 20,000 school bus mark of propane being here in the United States, with over 1,000 school districts and contractors using those propane buses. And once somebody starts, they always move forward with adopting more of them. And when all of our schools are open and all of our kids are actually in the classroom, we're moving over 1.25 million students to and from school. I'm just picking on Bluebird here because it was an easy access to get some numbers that they have all four: diesel, propane, CNG, and electric. And a lot of folks aren't aware of the price disparity that there are with all the alternatives there. So I just wanted to get this on. I think Buddy and Todd might be able to comment a little bit more on the electric portion of the Thomas bus as well. So how does this shake out with Volkswagen settlement money? Well, as of July, of the blue area is the amount of money awarded, and the yellow area is actually the number of buses deployed around these United States. And you can see we have, with propane, a really right side up equation. It's a good return on investment for getting more emissions reduced with less money. this actually bears out really well in a recent study that just came out last week, where we had two states compared: California, which has a very narrow approach, if I can say that, with zero emission vehicles only, kind of basically has to be EV or nothing in California for the most part. And they spent over the last 15 years $816 million to get there with reducing emissions. And with that $816 million they invested, they reduced 35,000 tons of nitrogen oxide. When you have a little bit more of the all of the above approach, like Texas has, they spent 561 million, but they reduced 61,000 tons of nitrogen oxides over the same 15-year period. I might add that Texas also leads the nation with propane school bus adoptions, with over 3,000 buses in the state of Texas. But that all of the above approach, like Ben was talking about, being fuel agnostic, allows for fleets to pick and choose the best energy source for their particular fleet operation to reduce the most amount of emissions, and it works very well that way. So let's take a peek at South Carolina. If we were using propane or clean diesel or electric, if we were to take all of the buses in South Carolina today and switch them over from diesel or propane, we'd actually reduce the NOx emissions for our state by 83,000 pounds a year. So let's get started on doing that. So in case you thought that propane was only for school buses, well, we have quite a few others, but the three areas that are adopting more is in that same class as school buses. They're more of a medium duty truck. They use a lot of fuel, and they're on regional routes, and not just the urban routes, but they're actually traveling over miles. And food and beverage is a huge adopter of this. Nestle Water has over 1,000 of their trucks. Schwann's has 4,000 in their home delivery. Paratransit, we probably have the greatest percentage of the paratransit market, with 10% of all those shuttle buses around the country operating on propane now. They use about twice the amount that a school bus would use in a year as far as fuel usage. But one of the biggest ones, and this one just happened in South Carolina, Blacksburg, South Carolina, where one of the contractors for the United States Postal Service just switched their diesel straight box trucks that move mail between distribution centers to propane, and they use over 1,000 gallons of fuel a month. So the amount of emissions reduced and the cost savings for those contractors has been huge. For those of you who are moving this into your districts and getting a handle on how all this is happening, I'm going to review with you the infrastructure options that are available. I know you've got fuel stations set up at various districts now, but for those of you who are working through this and how the deployment of those buses are going, just to give you an idea, there's wet hosing, or the bobtail that's here with those two reels is actually filling 400 vehicles every single night for the city of Boston that doesn't have room to set up any infrastructure. They didn't have it for diesel, and they certainly didn't have room to do it for propane. So this gets done overnight. It's not the most cost-efficient way, but it certainly takes care of a need that they had for space. There's temporary refueling setups that are on trailers with a skid-mounted system, a dispenser, and also a portable generator that operates on propane, so that you can be totally off the grid and move this exactly where you need it to make it happen. This is done a lot for demonstrations, but also for emergency response with hurricanes down in Florida, where school buses are not moving kids, but they're moving people out of harm's way. And for the deployment of those things, a lot of times they need to move around. So they will have also temporary fueling sites set up at emergency responder places as well for vehicles to be able to refuel. Matter of fact, bobtail trucks can actually go to a bulk facility and pull and push propane even when those facilities are without power. But most folks start with a standard, private station at their own facility because it's so inexpensive to do. This can start off with a 1,000 or even a 2,000 gallon tank with a dispenser that can track the fuel that's going into each vehicle. You can see this is very flexible. You can put it just about anywhere, taking up just more than a parking space, and putting up the crash posts about it is a very low cost. And it's also very scalable. Where if you're using more fuel, you're adding more vehicles, you don't have to change out the dispenser. You don't have to change out the electrical requirements. You can just add volume by additional tanks behind those that you already have. And they can be set up in a variety of configurations so that you can accommodate the size of the vehicles and the movement through your facility. When those are getting up into the hundreds, like this one here has 500 school buses, they're moving into some very large volume and actually getting even better pricing for the quantities that they're purchasing. The canopies that are set up, the locations, and even having a large volume picture here on the right for emergency backups, all of that is available. And you have some custom ones that if you don't have the footprint to go out and horizontal, then you can go vertical with fuel to meet the requirements that your facility has. The dispenser options are vast. From something as simple at the top left here of just counting the gallons manually with a meter, all the way to card readers that integrate into fuel management systems that tie into remote access to that data, and all the way to the convenience store retail dispensing of propane. I put this picture in because I did a session with Motor Week just a couple of weeks ago on the Michigan to Montana alt fuel corridor. And this was one of the stops that folks came in right off the interstate to fill up with propane. The nozzles for this changed as of January 1 of 2020, and now we have what's called a quick connect nozzle, which allows for no PPE. You don't have to have gloves or eyeglasses. It's a click on and click off, and it still moves fuel anywhere from 10 to 13 gallons a minute to match what's going on with diesel, so you don't have any time delay with refueling. Just so you have an idea of some cost comparisons here, if you're using diesel, you don't have to spend any more money. But when you move into some alternative energy sources, you do. If we were to do the full card reader integrated fuel management system and all the equipment, you could spend up to $40,000 on a fuel site for propane. But for natural gas, even with the time overnight, fills, you're going to have a much higher cost, and even electric is even going to be more than that. But the important thing with propane is that is a very scalable cost, because it's just adding more tanks behind it to up that capacity from 10 to hundreds of vehicles. So I'm going to show a little bit of a quick video. This is about 3.5 minutes long.
Fleets of any size can benefit from a central propane Autogas refueling station. It's convenient, safe to use, and can save you time and money. When you switch to Propane Autogas, your local propane and infrastructure suppliers will help determine the best refueling setup for your fleet. They're dedicated to making the process turnkey and easy. A permanent on-site refueling station includes a concrete foundation, one or more large capacity fuel tanks, a pump, one or more dispensers with meters, and crash protection. While situations vary, here's what happens during a typical installation. First, you'll meet with your suppliers to develop a detailed plan for your size of fleet, one that takes into account your available space and any traffic flow requirements. You'll also talk about expected growth for the future. With Propane Autogas, you can use the same fuel pump, motor, and dispenser as your fleet expands without any electric or site upgrades. Next, you'll sit down as a team to create a project timeline and contingency plan. At this stage, You'll determine which tasks are your responsibility, like coordinating any electrical work or site preparation. The electrical work will likely include 8-gauge wire to power about 30 amps. Your infrastructure supplier will ensure that all required permits are in place before the installation. You should also confirm that your data management system is compatible with the solution you're installing. Fortunately, most certified propane autogas dispensers are able to communicate with modern fuel management systems. But it doesn't hurt to double-check with your supplier. Now it's time for the installation to begin. The concrete pad for the tank is installed. Then, your supplier will arrive with the skid and propane tank. Once it's in place, the installers will connect the dispenser and pump to the pre-installed electrical. In this case, 4 simple wires power the 110-volt dispenser. Then, the propane supplier arrives to deliver the test gas for the tank. It gives the propane supplier enough liquid to test the pump and fill of a vehicle. They'll check the pumps, nozzles, plumbing, and hoses for safety. It's a safety check they'll repeat twice a year to give you peace of mind and keep the process convenient for you. Some fleets choose to protect their refueling station with an optional canopy. It can help shield valuable hoses and other components from the elements and keep employees out of the weather. The canopy is something your infrastructure supplier can install. If you need to refuel propane autogas vehicles before the installation is complete, talk to your propane supplier about temporary refueling options. This is just one example of how an installation works. Your setup might be smaller or larger depending on your fleet size. Whatever you choose, you can feel confident it'll be a streamlined, turnkey process supported by your local propane and infrastructure suppliers. For clean, cost-efficient fuel delivered conveniently, Propane can do that. To learn more about propane autogas and to find a fuel and infrastructure supplier near you, go to propane.com.
And if you go on the road, Ben had mentioned earlier the Department of Energy's Alternative Fuel Station Locator, and this is also an app for your phone, which I carry around a lot because I drive a pickup truck that operates on propane, and you can find it anywhere in the country, but especially here in South Carolina, or if you're actually going out of state on a field trip, you can use that locator to find any place else that you need to. And there's others, school districts that in other states that actually work together to allow fueling to happen at each other's facilities as they're traveling as well. So where's the future of propane going? We have a really good case right now for a value proposition for emissions, but we're always pressing this to get better. And one of the ways that we can reduce those greenhouse gases is actually through renewable propane. 10 years ago, it wasn't that big a deal. There was a few states implementing these greenhouse gas, carbon goals into their legislative regulatory process. But today, more than 50% of the country now has laws on the books to do this. And this is a growing regulatory issue. So renewable propane is what we've been working on. It's got a real low carbon intensity. We'll go through that. We got a lot of it, and it doesn't take much energy to actually make it either. It's projected by 2040, the worldwide source of propane will be at 50% renewable. So let's do a quick comparison here of how that goes. And everybody's comparing everything to the electric grid now, because if you drive an electric vehicle, then that's the baseline of zero emissions. Well, it all really depends on the electric grid's energy sources. So let's take a peek at this nationwide here real quick. We still got quite a bit of coal that's going into those states in the upper left there. I mean, Wyoming leads the way with 84% of their electric grid is actually supplied by coal. Natural gas has a big swath of contribution to the electric grid. And I might add here, both coal and natural gas are considered fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are not created equal. wood and coal and oil have a very high carbon content and are quite dirty with particulate matter as well, where the natural gases, including propane, methane, and others, are very clean. But petroleum and biomass don't contribute a whole lot to the electric grids. But let's look at the electric grid renewable sources. You can see where nuclear is very popular. And if you're familiar with, and I know Ben is, being in the energy office, we have over 50% of our electric grid here in South Carolina nuclear, which has a very small carbon footprint. And then hydro in the Pacific Northwest is where a lot of the hydro is contributed to the grid. And Vermont is actually one of the biggest hydro states around. There's some solar and some wind, especially through the mid states there, that we're able to get contributed to the grid. But all in all, if we do a comparison of our regular organic propane, not the renewable, we have a carbon index that ranges from about 79 to 83. And if you look at the map on the right, you can see the electric grid's carbon intensity, of which propane is better in 38 states than what the electric grid is doing. That's just with regular propane. In South Carolina, it's about a wash for carbon intensity of the electric grid compared to propane. But when we start going into a renewable propane, then this is actually the tons of CO2 reduced for a one truck to one truck comparison. I'm talking about a medium duty, class 7 truck that operates 200 miles a day on propane or the electric grids charging their battery. And in South Carolina, we would be 181 tons of CO2 less than the electric same truck driving the same amount every year. That's just on a one truck to one truck comparative basis here. But if we do our best in class renewable propane, blending it with renewable DME, of which we're starting to do now, it's this much better. But that's not really fair because the electric grid is going to get cleaner too. So let's do a comparison of everybody meeting the electric grid goals of 2035, which would be 95% renewable and having a 5,000 cycle battery, that million-mile battery that doesn't need to be replaced. And even in 2035, renewable propane's best blend is still better than the electric grid with greenhouse gas life cycle analysis. So just to recap here, we can do the benefits of propane and renewable propane is very cost effective. For a bus, we looked at the prices earlier. For less than 15% of an incremental cost, we can go into propane, which is far less than a lot of the other alternatives. We don't have to increase the payload. We use the same amount of weight, so we can move just as much payload, people and supplies. And we've already talked about how the greenhouse gas reductions are even much better. All of this information and everything else that you'd like to find is at propane.com. And we have a whole section on school transportation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. I believe Derek is next, and we'll go ahead and move the slide presentation control to Derek, who's going to talk about Roush and the Bluebird school buses that are located in the state of South Carolina now. And Derek, if you would, we'll go ahead and unmute yourself and put your video back up on the screen so people can hear you presenting.
Good morning, everybody. Very well done, Steve. So with regards to the presentation, there it is. Well, hey, everybody, I appreciate you all jumping on, and Steve, always a good education on wells to wheels, the total scope of it. I still don't know how you do that, go through that many slides and give that much content in the time frame that you do. Very well done. So today, everybody, we're going to be talking about the Roush Bluebird Cleantech propane autogas story that we have a partnership with Ford. I'm going to breeze through a lot of these slides to be considerate for the audience of it being more of a service technical minded, still 50,000 feet up just due to the timing that we have for today, but I wanted to instill some confidence and give a high level overview of what's been going on. So jumping right in, we have seen a historic change and disruption in every single transportation sector, but specifically with school buses. At Roush, we celebrated our 10th year anniversary this year. It was 6 people in one of Roush Industries' conference room table that's morphed into a supplier that handles now about 50% of everything that Bluebird builds. We work with all the Fortune 500 fleets, and we've got about 2,500 customers with over 37,000 vehicles that we've put on the road and growing exponentially. So pretty exciting to see it. And using a very, very proven high volume OEM partner like Ford Motor Company with their engine and chassis modifications. Pretty exciting to see what's been done here just in the past 10 years. So diving into the partnership with Bluebird. So Roush, we've been exclusive with Bluebird for the better part of a decade. I think we've renewed our vows quite a few times. And really just a fantastic story of giants coming together and running parallel for a while, and then meeting and then seeing, okay, the writing on the wall is emissions are going to get extremely strict. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more as we go through. But Bluebird had the sense, since they only build a school bus, had their finger on a pulse back in the early 2000s that, you know, what we're caring about is what's coming out of the tailpipe, and rightfully so. And we need to make a change because the equipment and the fluids and the cost to keep diesels on the road just isn't practical, and it's a burden for taxpayers. And if there's a better solution, the way Steve talked about earlier, right? If there's a better solution to be able to lower our emissions, increase savings, increase uptime, you know, that's kind of a win for everybody. Well, I don't care if you're private or public held from a fleet standpoint. So from the Type A to the Type C, Roush and Bluebird can take care of you with the Ford powertrain. And this is just one of the quick things to highlight and recap what Steve talked about. At Roush, we are fuel agnostic. Okay, we do hydrogen cell for governments and high Fortune 500 fleets. We do electrification, we do CNG, we do gasoline, diesel, and of course we do propane. When Jack Roush and our management team looked at investing the tens of millions of dollars, I think it's over 60 million that they've invested so far into clean tech, we found that propane, especially early on, wasn't a popular fuel. Everyone was on this natural gas wave. And then they were saying hydrogen is going to be the bridge. Well, a lot happened in the past 10 years. And I'm proud to say when we look at total cost of ownership, when we look at all of these different segments on the left, propane today is still the clear winner for all of those. So I'll dive into a little bit more on the service side of it later on. When I talked about disruption, I got to tip my hat to Bluebird for them going out and finding people in this space, you know, like Ford and like Roush that are willing to come alongside. And we thought maybe in 20 years we'll scratch the surface. Well, it turns out that the industry and the school districts have spoken fairly quickly. This is quite historic to be a part of. We're looking at almost 50% of everything Bluebird builds now is on a Ford Roush powertrain, and we're pretty excited about that, and so is Ford. Now, when we look at the deployments, right, so we're about 80% of the market share when it comes to propane, and when Steve made that comment about all the school bus OEMs being in propane, he's absolutely right, and you know, at Roush we're thrilled about that, because for the first 3 years it was just by ourselves telling people that, hey, propane is a fantastic fuel, especially for student transportation and school buses. And now we have everybody bought into it, which really competition just makes everything sweeter. So we're happy about that. If you look at these green birds, these are not individual buses, these are deployments. One bird can mean one bus, and one bird could mean 500 buses. But as you see, the reason why 19 out of the top 25 school bus markets have leaned into propane heavily is because they're talking. Okay, we have people in Canada, we have people all the way in Florida, LA, Boston, all over. You talk about Denali National Park up there in Alaska, right? 17% grade inclines, right, with a Ford powertrain, and they love it. They're on their 3rd year of purchasing, and they find it phenomenal. They're carrying fully grown humans, not even kids. So it's exciting to now be able to educate and show people that propane is real. Talk to your peers, talk to your neighbors. And we're seeing it grow at a very exponential rate. So the product, the POWERTRAIN, okay? So as you all see in front of us here, this is the Type C Bluebird Vision. Every application of wheelbase we can apply, and the gallons are associated there. We have a 47-gallon tank. Boston was the one actually who introduced that to the market. They want their whole fleet to be running on propane, and due to their urban tight corners and streets, they needed to have a 169-inch lift bus. And we didn't have a tank, but engineering is what we do at Roush, so we went back to the board and got it for them. Have a 67 as a standard, and then a 93-gallon as the extended range tank. Coupled that with the Ford 6.8-liter V10 with the 6R 140 shift 6 transmission, all under one house. So this slide I wanted to show just from a simplicity standard, and I can walk through this in a more technical aspect. We have a large library of tech tip videos on our website. Everything is full transparency, open door, and we're happy to be doing Zoom training calls with emergency responders, tech mechanics, service centers, you name it. We've been able to do that. But this just gives you an idea of the simplicity with what we're working with. Propane, the tanks are in the exact same spot of the diesel, safest place of the bus, right? We've got crash barriers underneath them pointing down in case there is an accident. And we have videos with over 1 billion miles now. We've got videos of tractor trailers hitting these vehicles, tow vehicles behind the vehicles catching on fire, and nothing is compromised with the propane fuel system, whereas conventional fuels, or maybe other alternative fuels, might have a higher risk. We map the fuel lines the exact same way with diesel. And as you can see, our POWERTRAIN sits right in the front with about 600 pounds lighter than a diesel engine would be. So we're actually saving on tires too. So just give you an idea of how things are routed, very simplistic. From the environmental standpoint, I won't talk too much about this, but near zero is where we're at, and we're going even lower heading into the future with new POWERTRAINs and new catalyst assemblies. As far as the studies, now why does this matter from the tech and service side, right? So the West Virginia University did a phenomenal, case study of hooking up their mobile black box to an en-route diesel school bus, clean diesel school bus, and one of our propane school buses. His incredible NOx reduction. I mean, look at that, 96% of it. And with the stop, start, heavy idle, propane is a perfect fit, whereas diesel, as we know, not so much, right? Diesel needs to get on the road, it needs to regen, it needs to burn off. Just give you an idea on that right side, the new diesels, right, with those ultrafine particulates, those filters are never the same, right? And those have costs associated with them. And if you really want to talk emissions, the studies are coming out in droves. I mean, one of the European studies here is during a DPF regen on a clean diesel, those emissions spiked well past the legal limits, right? And that's not necessary, especially if we have a simplistic spark ignited offering to be able to replace that. We're seeing Georgia State University, for the first time, we're seeing studies that propane autogas school buses with low emission, tailpipe emission, near zero NOx emissions, we're seeing better improvement in the classroom. And that's just wild to be able to see. We look at cost and complexity. This is really where we want to stress to the techs and the mechanics. This is very simple, right? If you're familiar with a spark ignited and Ford Motor Company, you're going to be very, very familiar with what we do at Roush. At Roush, we're a QVM and a QCM for Ford Motor Company, qualified vehicle modifier and qualified calibration modifier. What that means is we're one of 2 companies in the world that Ford actually gives complete total access to their coding and calibration, so we can optimize their engine specifically for propane, which we have to. There's a lot of calibrations and modifications of engineering that go into that. It's not just a simple slap it on and drill into the intake and you're off and going. With electronics these days, having everything in sync is very important, and we have that. Fuel filtration is the only unique maintenance item. So outside of your typical spark plug changes, 7 quarts of oil at 5,000 miles, your normal fluid on a Ford POWERTRAIN, the only thing you're gonna have to do is change the filtration, that's a Roush unique component, 50,000 miles, right? And that's it. So we have a whole training module that goes through all this, but we wanna stress the simplicity. Like I said, preventative maintenance, let's start there. Very, very simplistic, 7 versus 17 to 30 on a diesel. You look at the costs associated with this, right? We're about $200 less than your diesel counterpart that still has a majority in the market today. We look at the components, okay, that are currently on a diesel today. And gentlemen and ladies on this call, this is not even what's coming, okay? This is today. This is what we currently have to deal with. And speaking with districts, I was in Ohio before the pandemic hit, and there was a district that had some older diesel buses that were still clean diesels, that they were sitting on the side of the road collecting weeds around them because they didn't have the money to be able to replace a lot of these diesel components once they were out of warranty. So we're getting to that point, and if we can get rid of them, they don't have to fail, and the bus does not go down. This is currently the components you guys are familiar with for the diesel side of it, especially the clean diesel side, $21,000. Astronomical when you put all these ancillary devices together to replace. You look at that from a Ford Roush, you're looking at a fraction of it, okay, about $3,400. You look at complete engine swip, right? So on the Ford aspect, all in with a Roush fuel system, you're under $10,000, right? On a Cummins, you're quite closer to $19,000, and then on other platforms, again, closer to $20,000 with insane lead times. For the techs mechanics on the call, we had school districts, unfortunately, forget to put oil back into the engine for an oil change. Under 10 days, engine back up on the road, under $10,000. So pretty exciting. And that's the most expensive it could be. You could short block it and do the work yourself. But that's what happens when you get a high volume OEM partner like Ford Motor Company to be able to service these, not just today, but 30 years from now. Also, the diesel of tomorrow. So right now, if you think things are tough on diesel engines, just wait. In 2027, the standard is going to be 0.02. And we're there right now with propane. And we're excited to. We spent the millions to be able to get there because we wanted to be way ahead of the curve. So when we do get stricter on the tailpipe, we're ready today to be able to meet that in 2027. Something to think about. Savings, we're seeing them across the board. I won't spend too much time with this, but we do have a TCO calculator that we love to work with. All those 2,500 fleets, I don't care if they're yellow or white, school bus, type A, type C, we have a calculator to walk through at a very high level, a conservative approach of what are your savings going to be. Because like Steve said, if it doesn't make it fiscal responsibility or sustainability, it's hard to enjoy the environmental ones. Safety. We do a whole presentation. Actually, we're doing some for Halifax and Nova Scotia. They've just taken over 130 of our propane buses, and we're going to do a virtual emergency responder training for the teams up there. We're happy to do it. One of the last comments I got was from a fire department saying, can we have propane-powered fire engines because they're dealing with the same problems? Canadian and federal motor vehicle safety standard approved. Lots of engineering has gone into this. So from the customer success side, think of myself and Tom Hopkins as the driver for a NASCAR, but our pit crew is the best in the world. Jack Roush and the Roush team does not do anything without having the pillars behind it in place. Installers, fleets can do their own warranty and service work. We have over 700 locations and growing in the United States and Canada. We have mobile teams reaching out to us now to be able to help service these customers that are out there. So we do anything from order management, service networks, technical publications, trainings, tech tip videos, diagnostics, the Ford IDS, Roush diagnostic tooling, right? All of it can be handled through it. So that's just a high level. I appreciate you all so much, and I apologize if I went a little bit over. If you have any questions, please reach out to myself. Me and Tom Hopkins at Roush will be able to take care of you. Thank you all.
Todd, are you able to advance the slides?
Yes, perfect. Okay, good morning. Great. This is Todd Manuel with Interstate Transportation Equipment here in Columbia. We represent Thomas Built Buses here in South Carolina. and myself and Buddy Miller will spend a few minutes. Thank you for the invitation to present operational and maintenance items related to the Drive Force 8.8 liter propane engine, which we provide in our current Thomas C2 product. So current, we have units deployed all throughout South Carolina, from the upstate, Taylor's, Greenville area to the Midlands, Richland, Columbia, Lexington, units in the Low Country, Beaufort, and units operating in the Grand Strand, Myrtle Beach, Conway. So the Drive Force 8.8 liter propane engine that's utilized in the Thomas Safety Liner C2. Some operational features that make this engine ideal in a school bus application. As far as displacement and horsepower, it's 8.8 liter, 535 cubic inches at 270 horsepower. The torque rating for the engine, which makes it ideal in a school bus, is 565 foot-pounds. What that does is allows the school bus to move from stop at a much greater ease, and also gives great power as far as pulling hills and grades. The power characteristics are comparable to diesel. The feedback we've gotten from the operators using this particular engine really has been very positive, and for the Drive Force 8.8 liter. As far as some of the benefits and positives that we're receiving feedback on is less noise, quiet operation, less heat, very smooth operation with less vibration. And coupled with the Drive Force 8.8 liter, we're utilizing an Allison 2500 transmission, which is the dominant engine in this class of school bus. And so from an operating standpoint, the drivers and technicians with these units know that transmission up and down. So perfectly matched for the torque ratings that the Drive Force engine provides. The current Thomas buses in operation, they include twin tanks mounted in the rear of the vehicle, center of the frame rails in a very safe location. And as far as the diesel gallon equivalent, you've got 126 gallons with 100 gallons usable. So as far as frequency of fill-ups, the operation of this bus can go greater ranges with, in between fueling intervals. As far as the dash, what the driver will see, a very simple, well laid out dash. Operators of this class of vehicle are accustomed to seeing a wait to start button. So that's very similar. When the key is cycled on, they'll see a wait to start button as the system purges the vapor from the line. Just in a matter of seconds, they're able to safely start the vehicle as they currently do with their other powertrains in operation. These units are delivered with a very simple system as far as fueling. So when fueling takes place, the benefit of using the Quick Connect fitting, it's a one-handed operation, provides a secure connection, and with that secure connection, reduces the risk of releasing emissions into the air versus the standard screw-on type fitting. So from an operation standpoint, those are some of the features and feedback that we've gotten on the units in service. So I'm going to throw it over to Buddy Miller and have him take you through the rest of the presentation. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to go into basically the maintenance part of it. The engine operational features here, it has the OBD HD diagnostics contained in the ECM, which continuously monitors the engine performance, it monitors the emissions, ensures the safety is functioning properly, cylinder misfire detection. It has a smart purge evap system for consistent, successful engine starts. So like Todd had said, during that pre-run, it monitors and identifies various starting conditions, and it'll allow the vapor fumes to be vacuumed back out and the lines refilled with liquid, because it's obviously a liquid propane engine. One of the good things about the Thomas propane buses, is the current software that everyone's using now for the Thomas buses, the diagnostic link, which works with the Detroit engines and the Thomas multiplex system on the bus itself, also works with the Drive Force 8.8 liter. So you can do all your troubleshooting on your older buses with the Detroit engines and your newer buses with the propane engines, or older buses, the body side as well. And it does have an automotive engine control module. All of that can be operated, can be maintained and seen, troubleshot with the diagnostic link, which is used with the older buses as well. And it has a dedicated fuel delivery and dedicated return lines from and to the tank to the distribution block on top of the engine. Here you can see the right side view, the front right side view and the left side view. Basically, it just shows you the fuel distribution block here on top, your fuel injectors, which are mounted outside of the manifolds. You can get to them without having to take the manifold off. You have your throttle position sensor up front, your throttle actuator up front, your ignition coils are also mounted on the outside. You have a optional oil pan heater. Then on this side, you have your coolant heater, the engine oil pressure and temperature sensor, the crankshaft position sensor, a knock sensor, and your manifold absolute pressure sensor. All of these are fairly easy to get to. On the front view of the engine, here again, you can see the crankshaft position, the camshaft position sensor. Here's your throttle position sensor and your throttle actuator. The LPG delivery to the engine. Obviously, the LPG is stored in the fuel tank. It's transferred from the tank to the lines via a supply pump, fuel delivery lines, fuel distribution block, and coaxial fuel lines. It flows through the supply solenoid valve, external fuel filter mounted on the supply side of the fuel hoses. After the filter, the liquid propane flows through the liquid propane fuel hoses to the fuel distribution block, which is mounted on top of the engine. And that one has the fuel pressure and temperature sensors installed in the distribution block. There's also a service port on the distribution block, so you can check the fuel pressure during diagnostics. From the distribution block, the fuel is then transferred to the fuel rails via coaxial fuel lines. Once it passes through there, it goes to the injectors when the ECM commands the fuel injectors to open. It immediately converts from a liquid to a vapor once it passes through the injectors, and then the excess fuel in the rail is then returned to the distribution block and then returned to the fuel line via a fuel return solenoid valve and then back to the tank. The maintenance schedule for the Drive Force 8.8 liter, let's change the oil and filters every 5,000 miles or 200 hours, 6 months, whichever, obviously comes first. You're gonna do your quality check on your coolant during annual inspections. You can inspect the fuel system during an annual inspection. Belts and tensions, intake pipe, clamps, 15,000 miles or year and a half. Your fuel filter every 70,000 miles Electrical system every 35,000 miles. You want to flush the coolant system at 60,000 miles, and then inspect and replace your spark plugs and plug wires at 60,000 miles. Now, these are just obviously the recommended, and you want to make sure you do the or, so it's going to be the mileage or the hours or the months. If that's it for us, if there's not any questions, obviously we don't have questions right now, I'll turn it over to Mr. Mike Bullman with the Department of Education.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Mike Bullman. As Buddy just said, I'm with the Department of Education and currently serving as the president of SCAPT, the South Carolina Association for Pupil Transportation. Want to thank Ben and Palmetto Clean Fuels for again putting this on and letting us share a little bit of our experience with the propane school buses here in South Carolina. Again, based on the information that I've heard so far, they definitely did not save the best for last, as I have probably learned more than I'll share. So again, just want to share with everyone our experience here, a little feedback, the feedback that we've gotten from the operators and school districts, again, based on the 217 units that we currently have running in the state. A little bit of information here. For some reason, guys, I'm not able to advance the presentation. Here we go. Okay. So again, as I said earlier, we've got 217 propane powered buses in the state currently. These are both Thomas and Bluebird. So again, we've got a little bit of experience with both of the manufacturers represented here today. They're spread out across 10 school districts all over the state. So again, they're running from the coastal area to the Midlands to the upstate. Again, in the Greenville County area, which is has a little bit of I don't want to say mountainous area, but certainly it's quite hilly there. So again, we've got them spread out so we can sort of get a lot of feedback on how they operate under the various geographical locations. Our current cost of ownership is approximately 3 to 5% less than a diesel powered unit. Now, I want to sort of I guess I should have prefaced that by saying that the potential for greater cost savings is certainly there. We find that, and we found out early, that driver education is crucial to getting the most out of your propane powered vehicle as you possibly can. We feel like that there's a little bit more potential there for cost savings in terms of fuel usage, especially. And again, that really goes back to driver education. As most everyone on here knows, propane, typically isn't very efficient, certainly when it's idling and things of that nature. So again, we have to really be conscientious of our anti-idling policies, and we really have to have a little more involved driver training program in terms of stopping and starting and those kinds of things to really get the most efficiency out of the propane powered bus. Obviously, fuel cost is less per gallon than diesel. Again, here's the pros and cons, and there are some cons, and we'll get to that, or at least from our perspective. So obviously, fuel cost is less per gallon than diesel. It's cleaner, less polluting, has already been said much more eloquently than I can certainly say. Quieter operation. Again, the drivers really comment on it being quiet. Although a modern diesel is fairly quiet in itself, but obviously the propane is slightly quieter. Skill set needed for the techs is slightly less than those required for diesel techs. Again, as Buddy and Steve have already said, working and maintaining these propane engines is a little bit simpler. it's a little less complex than the diesels are today. So again, we find that skill set is not quite as involved as it would be for the diesel techs. It obviously reduces the country's dependency on import oil. So that's already been stated. Again, that certainly would fall into the pro category. Reduces the risk of ground spillage, as has already been said. Again, I'm just repeating a lot of what's already been said, but it's certainly things to be considered, and it's worth repeating. Less costly oil changes. Again, both manufacturers have already stated this, and even though you will, and one of the cons is you're going to change the oil more frequently, certainly over time, the cost savings are there because it's much less per change than it would be on a diesel engine. And a big one is certainly the no diesel after treatment systems or components. As already been stated, those are very costly. That technology seems to be changing often as the EPA standards and regulations change. So will the requirements for the various methods or means of cleaning up those diesel engines. So again, those components can be quite costly and obviously are not on a propane powered unit. That again goes back into and that's part of the whole regulations with a diesel engine in meeting the emissions. There's no DEF. So that ongoing cost of DEF and adding the labor to add that DEF and keep it topped off isn't there, not required. So again, that certainly is an advantage. Fueling schedule flexibility for districts. So here in South Carolina, the Department of Education owns and maintains the entire fleet of school buses, and again, we're responsible for the entire maintenance program, including fueling. But one of the things we implemented when we really got into the propane side of things was to, as we set the infrastructure on the district property at the parking locations, we gave the districts the opportunity or provided them the opportunity to fuel their own buses. So instead of having a fueling schedule by which they would get fuel, every other day or every third day or whatever they would normally be getting fuel, we give them the flexibility of fueling whenever they want. So we purchase the propane, we have the propane, the bulk tank filled by the contractor, and the district can fuel that bus. They can fuel it every day. They can fuel it after hours. Again, it's really their call, and it provides them a lot of flexibility, which they really appreciate. Again, they don't have to wait for a specific fuel day. There are some cons. Again, the cost, at least for us, is about 10% more expensive than that of a comparable diesel unit. They get less miles per gallon than a diesel engine. Again, that's offset by lower cost per gallon, but again, I'm just merely stating the pros and cons as it relates to our specific fleet. As I've already stated, you get more frequent oil changes. So you got a little bit of labor there. Again, over the life of the vehicle, it's going to be a little less expensive though than the diesel unit. So that could easily be in the pro category as well. The addition of infrastructure could be a cost factor to consider. Again, it was for us. We will expand as we move and expand the propane units. We will continue to ask for VW funding. Phase 2, I hope, will be released soon here in South Carolina, and we will certainly ask for to be considered for those funds. And we'll look at propane hard. We're certainly interested in EV as well, but we will certainly move on the Department of Insurance's suggestion in terms of what that funding can be used for. At least in our experience, long-term powertrain reliability is still unknown. At least, again, and I'm speaking specifically for us. We don't think there's going to be any issues with either brand. We feel like that they're going to be very reliable. We feel like that the life cycle will be comparable to what our diesel fleet is. And as already been mentioned, if there is a repower needed, that repower is less expensive, quite a bit less expensive than the diesel counterpart. So again, we don't expect that to be a big con. However, at this point, I'll just be honest, and again, it's really unknown from our perspective. Really, that's all I have. Again, I think a lot of this has already been stated. There's a lot of good information here. We feel that the propane certainly has an area for us. We will continue, as I've stated earlier, we will continue to expand what we have. Our infrastructure, there's room for growth in additional buses in all of our locations. And so that's our plan. Our plan is to continue adding propane in those areas, existing areas. And again, we look forward to working with the propane industry, with Palmetto Clean Fuels, and continuing to utilize the propane product. That's all I have.
Awesome. Fantastic, Michael. I appreciate your presentation and some of the notes that you had about, your own personal perspectives of propane use. And us putting on this virtual event is kind of, we're trying to redo what we did last year. We had that in-person training, and y'all just had Bluebirds at that time, but now you also have Thomas. So wanted to get the best of both worlds in here in terms of the operation and maintenance. And I've got a question. Maybe I'll tie in Todd and Derek and Buddy in here. Driver education was brought up last year as a big issue too. Of as these operators and drivers transition away from diesel and hop into these propane buses, some of what they'll find in terms of the torque curve and takeoff is a little bit different than them, mashing down on the gas pedal on the diesel and, getting that full torque at that low RPM. So maybe you guys want to talk a little bit about some efficiency tips for drivers, what they might expect driving around the bus in terms of fuel efficiency and how to maximize.
Sure. Yeah, Ben, that's a pretty phenomenal point. I've been with Roush for about 8 years now, and I've seen Generation 3 now through Generation 5 that's coming out. We've learned and we've heard from the mics that are out there. I remember when we started, we had certain fleets that had about 100 or so propane buses, very similar routes, different drivers. Some were getting 3 miles per gallon, and some were getting 5.5 miles per gallon. And it's really a lot of the power is behind the wheel. We have limited, shift points in the transmission. We've got an econo shift, a performance shift. We're recommending different, gear ratios depending on terrain to really kind of optimize and get the best fuel economy. But really we've spent a lot of time developing our library for drivers. I'm in South Carolina now, so Tom and I work very closely together. If there's ever a time for me to be able to do driver training for a week and just finding different drivers to give them some training and some it's idling, for example. On a spark ignited engine, you're going to consume almost as much fuel going full bore down the road with a bus full of kids. That's just the way spark versus compression ignite works, as opposed to a Cummins, which will actually consume less fuel than it's idling. Well, with propane and these Ford engines and spark ignited engines, you don't need to idle too much because of the heat. It heats up so quickly no matter what bus you have. So we have that available. From a technical side, we can look at your specific fleet. Tom and I can look at, okay, maybe we reflash, maybe we look at putting the econo shift in, or for future, maybe we look at gear ratios. But in the meantime, I'm always more than happy to come and sit with drivers and talk with them on how this is different than diesel.
Sorry, I was muted there. Fantastic. Thank you, Derek. And Todd and Buddy, I wanted to give you a chance if you guys got any resources for driver training from the Thomas side.
Yeah, like always with Mike knows, we're we right here in Columbia, South Carolina, anytime he needs driver training, we go out and do it. We've done driver training at Lexington School District a couple of years ago for when they got new buses. We've done some at the CDC and did some at Lexington when I was over there helping Bruce out with some buses not too long ago. I talked to a couple of the drivers that were on the new propane buses. So yeah, anytime anybody needs training, we're willing to come out to you and take our time to sit down with you and show you any ups or downs that we know.
Fantastic. Awesome. And there was one question in the chat box here from Lauren Sullivan, and I'll say, if y'all attendees have questions, please look at the chat box here on the bottom ribbon. You can type something in and ask us. But I'm guessing this one's for Steve with your emissions maps and power generation. But where does renewable natural gas fit into the market, given California is pulling so much out of it, out of the grid?
Sure. I think the question might be for renewable propane instead of renewable natural gas, because I don't think we're using CNG in any of the buses. I could be wrong. I just don't think so. But whether it's renewable natural gas or renewable propane, both of them are becoming very, very popular and in demand. But as far as renewable propane goes, we move that around just like gasoline and diesel, so it doesn't necessarily have to go through that pipeline. And most of what we're getting now, the leader in the country is REG, and REG is producing about 5 million gallons a year now of renewable propane. And just like renewable natural gas, a lot of it's going into California. And the reason is because of the demand. They actually have low carbon fuel standard credits and laws in place that make it very attractive to move it all the way there. But as other states adopt low carbon fuel standard, that will shift. For example, in Georgia, even though they don't have what's matching in California, the fleet demand there has a lot going into the Atlanta area with fleets that want to use it. It's also going up into Virginia and in some into Maryland. I think more is actually headed towards Ohio. So as the demand for it increases, but folks are getting it there. We have an announcement I made a couple of weeks ago that the Phillips 66 refinery in the San Francisco Bay Area is switching over to renewable, and they'll be producing about 35 million gallons a year of renewable propane. So it'll make it a little bit easier for California to get it right from there instead of Louisiana. So things are shifting all the time. And what's really nice about renewable propane is it's very little cost difference from the organic propane we have. And again, same molecular structure, but doesn't need to slow us down in the implementation. The same buses that are from Thomas and Bluebird that operate on propane, and the same infrastructure that you're deploying today, it's a drop-in fuel to move into renewable when it is in your area.
Awesome, thank you, Steve.
I have a question for Todd. I just heard last week that the 8.8 liter has moved into an ultra low NOx certification as well. Todd, do you know when that trickles down into the order process for folks being able to select that 0.02 ultra low NOx?
We have not been alerted by Thomas Freightliner or Freightliner Custom Chassis on when that changeover will take effect. So we would be waiting for details on when that would come to market and be an offering in the Thomas C2.
Okay, very good. I know it was just last week that it was announced, and I know this process takes a while to deploy. But I got excited about hearing that particular 0.02 matches well with the 8.8. Good news.
Awesome. Well, I don't know if anybody else has any questions, and maybe we can wrap up a little early today. But I do want to say that tomorrow, November 5th, we are having another propane event. Palmetto Clean Fuels is. We'll be focusing on, that great class 5 to class 7 range that Derek had kind of talked about, where propane can really fit into the box trucks and straight trucks and support vehicles that might be running around in your school districts, and how you might want to integrate propane with those vehicles. So you can find that event on palmettocleanfuels.org under our events page and sign up. It'll be a Zoom event as well. So hopefully we'll see you there tomorrow. But I do want to thank all of our presenters and panelists and attendees for tuning in today and presenting some really good information. Like Julianne said, this will be recorded and we'll send it out to everyone. So y'all can just have this as a resource and reference that you can look back to and have information, and hopefully can be passed down to other people. So just thank you to everyone for attending today, and hope you guys have a great rest of your Tuesday.
Thanks a lot, Ben.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Ben.
everyone.
See you.